Section 3 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Hannah Dormer. Section 3. The motor car, with its blinds drawn and an air of inscrutable reserve, proceeded towards Piccadilly, still gazed at, still ruffling the faces on both sides of the street with the same dark breath of veneration, whether for the Queen, Prince, or Prime Minister, nobody knew. The face itself had been seen only once by 3 people for a few seconds. Even the sex was now in dispute, but there could be no doubt that greatness was seated within. Greatness was passing, hidden, down Bond Street, removed only by a hand's breadth from ordinary people who might now, for the first and last time, be within speaking distance of the majesty of England, of the enduring symbol of the state which will be known to curious antiquaries, sifting the ruins of time, when London is a grass-grown path, and all those hurrying along the pavement this Wednesday are but bones with a few wedding rings mixed up in their dust, and the gold stoppings of innumerable decayed teeth. The face in the motor car will then be known. It is probably the Queen, thought Mrs. Dalloway, coming out of Mulberry's with her flowers. The Queen. And for a second she wore a look of extreme dignity, standing by the flower shop in the sunlight while the car passed at a foot's pace, with its blinds drawn. The Queen going to some hospital, the Queen opening some bazaar, thought Clarissa. The crush was terrific for the time of day. Lord's, Ascot, Hurlingham, what was it? She wondered, for the street was blocked. The British middle classes sitting sideways on the tops of omnibuses with parcels and umbrellas, yes, even furs, on a day like this, were, she thought, more ridiculous, more unlike anything there has ever been than one could conceive. And the Queen herself held up. The Queen herself unable to pass. Clarissa was suspended on one side of Brook Street, Sir John Buckhurst, the old judge, on the other, with the car between them. Sir John had laid down the law for years and liked a well-dressed woman. When the chauffeur, leaning ever so slightly, said or showed something to the policeman, who saluted and raised his arm and jerked his head and moved the omnibus to the side, and the car passed through. Slowly and very silently it took its way. Clarissa guessed, Clarissa knew, of course. She had seen something white, magical, circular, in the footman's hand, a disc inscribed with a name. The Queen's, the Prince of Wales's, the Prime Minister's, which, by force of its own lustre, burnt its way through. Clarissa saw the car diminishing, disappearing, to blaze among candelabras, glittering stars, breasts stiff with oak leaves. Hugh Whitbread and all his colleagues, the gentlemen of England, that night in Buckingham Palace. And Clarissa, too, gave a party. She stiffened a little. So she would stand at the top of the stairs. The car had gone, but it had left a slight ripple which flowed through glove shops and hat shops and tailors' shops on both sides of Bond Street. For 30 seconds all heads were inclined the same way, to the window, choosing a pair of gloves. Should they be to the elbow or above it? Lemon or pale grey? Ladies stopped. When the sentence was finished, something had happened. Something so trifling in single instances that no mathematical instrument, though capable of transmitting shocks in China, could register the vibration, yet in its fullness rather formidable, and in its common appeal emotional. For in all the hat shops and tailors' shops strangers looked at each other and thought of the dead, of the flag, of empire. In a public house in a back street, a colonial insulted the House of Windsor, which led to words, broken beer glasses, and a general shindy, which echoed strangely across the way in the ears of girls buying white underlinen threaded with pure white ribbon for their weddings. For the surface agitation of the passing car as it sunk, grazed something very profound. Gliding across Piccadilly, the car turned down St. James's Street. Tall men, men of robust physique, well-dressed men with their tailcoats and their white slips and their hair raked back, who, for reasons difficult to discriminate, were standing in the bow window of Brooks's, with their hands behind the tails of their coats, looking out, perceived instinctively that greatness was passing, and the pale light of the immortal presence fell upon them as it had fallen upon Clarissa Dalloway. At once they stood even straighter, and removed their hands, and seemed ready to attend their sovereign, if need be, to the cannon's mouth, as their ancestors had done before them. The white busts and the little tables in the background, covered with copies of the Tatler and siphons of soda water, seemed to approve, seemed to indicate the flowing corn and the manor houses of England, and to return the frail hum of the motor wheels as the walls of a whispering gallery return a single voice, expanded and made sonorous by the might of a whole cathedral. Shawled Moll Pratt, with her flowers on the pavement, wished the dear boy well. It was the Prince of Wales, for certain, and would have tossed the price of a pot of beer, a bunch of roses, into St. James's Street out of sheer light-heartedness and contempt of poverty, had she not seen the constable's eyes upon her, discouraging an old Irishwoman's loyalty. The sentries at St. James's saluted. Queen Alexandra's policemen approved. A small crowd, meanwhile, had gathered at the gates of Buckingham Palace. Listlessly yet confidently, poor people all of them, they waited. Looked at the palace itself with the flag flying, at Victoria billowing on her mound, admired her shelves of running water, her geraniums, singled out from the motor cars in the mall, first this one, then that, bestowed emotion, vainly, upon commoners out for a drive, recalled their tribute to keep it unspent while this car passed and that, and all the time let rumour accumulate in their veins and thrill the nerves in their thighs at the thought of royalty looking at them. The Queen bowing, the Prince saluting, at the thought of the heavenly life divinely bestowed upon kings, of the equerries and deep curtsies, of the Queen's old doll's house, of Princess Mary married to an Englishman, and the Prince, the Prince, who took wonderfully, they said, after old King Edward, but was ever so much slimmer. The Prince lived at St. James's, but he might come along in the morning to visit his mother. So Sarah Bletchley said, with her baby in her arms, tipping her foot up and down as though she were by her own fender in Pimlico, but keeping her eyes on the Mall, while Emily Coates ranged over the palace windows and thought of the housemaids, the innumerable housemaids, the bedrooms, the innumerable bedrooms, joined by an elderly gentleman with an Aberdeen terrier, by men without occupation, the crowd increased. Little Mr. Bowley, who had rooms in the Albany and was sealed with wax over the deeper sources of life, but could be unsealed suddenly, inappropriately, sentimentally by this sort of thing. Poor women waiting to see the Queen go past. Poor women, nice little children, orphans, widows, the war. Tut, tut. Actually had tears in his eyes. A breeze, flaunting ever so warmly down the Mall through the thin trees past the bronze heroes, lifted some flag flying in the British breast of Mr. Bowley, and he raised his hat as the car turned into the Mall, and held it high as the car approached, and let the poor mothers of Pimlico press close to him, and stood very upright. The car came on. Suddenly Mrs. Coates looked up into the sky. The sound of an aeroplane bored ominously into the ears of the crowd. There it was, coming over the trees, letting out white smoke from behind, which curled and twisted, actually writing something, making letters in the sky. Everyone looked up. Dropping dead down, the aeroplane soared straight up, curved in a loop, raced, sank, rose, and whatever it did, wherever it went, out fluttered behind it a thick ruffled bar of white smoke, which curled and wreathed upon the sky in letters. But what letters? A, C, was it? An E, then an L? Only for a moment did they lie still. Then they moved and melted and were rubbed out up in the sky, and the aeroplane shot further away, and again, in a fresh space of sky, began writing a K, an E, a Y perhaps? "Glaxo," said Mrs. Coates in a strained, awe-stricken voice, gazing straight up, and her baby, lying stiff and white in her arms, gazed straight up. "Cremo," murmured Mrs. Bletchley, like a sleepwalker. With his hat held out perfectly still in his hand, Mr. Bowley gazed straight up. All down the Mall people were standing and looking up into the sky. As they looked, the whole world became perfectly silent, and a flight of gulls crossed the sky, first one gull leading, then another, and in this extraordinary silence and peace, in this pallor, in this purity, bells struck 11 times, the sound fading up there among the gulls. The aeroplane turned and raced and swooped, exactly where it liked, swiftly, freely, like a skater. "That's an E," said Mrs. Bletchley. or a dancer. "It's toffee," murmured Mr. Bowley. And the car went in at the gates and nobody looked at it. And shutting off the smoke, away and away it rushed, and the smoke faded and assembled itself round the broad white shapes of the clouds. It had gone. It was behind the clouds. There was no sound. The clouds to which the letters E, G, or L had attached themselves moved freely, as if destined to cross from west to east on a mission of the greatest importance, which would never be revealed. And yet certainly so it was, a mission of the greatest importance. Then suddenly, as a train comes out of a tunnel, the aeroplane rushed out of the clouds again, the sound boring into the ears of all people in the Mall, in the Green Park, in Piccadilly, in Regent Street, in Regent's Park, and the bar of smoke curved behind, and it dropped down, and it soared up and wrote one letter after another. But what word was it writing? Lucretia Warren Smith, sitting by her husband's side on a seat in Regent's Park and the Broad Walk, looked up. "Look, look, Septimus!" she cried, for Dr. Holmes had told her to make her husband, who had nothing whatever seriously the matter with him, but was a little out of sorts, take an interest in things outside himself. So, thought Septimus, looking up, they are signalling to me. Not indeed in actual words, that is, he could not read the language yet, but it was plain enough, this beauty, this exquisite beauty, and tears filled his eyes as he looked at the smoke words languishing and melting in the sky and bestowing upon him in their inexhaustible charity and laughing goodness one shape after another of unimaginable beauty, and signalling their intention to provide him for nothing, for ever, for looking merely, with beauty, more beauty. Tears ran down his cheeks. It was toffee. They were advertising toffee, a nursemaid told Regia. Together they began to spell T-O-F-K-R, said the nursemaid, and Septimus heard her say K-R close to his ear, deeply, softly, like a mellow organ, but with a roughness in her voice like a grasshopper's, which rasped his spine deliciously and sent running up into his brain waves of sound which, concussing, broke. A marvelous discovery indeed, that the human voice in certain atmospheric conditions, for one must be scientific, above all scientific, can quicken trees into life. Happily Regia put her hand with a tremendous weight on his knee, so that he was weighted down, transfixed, or the excitement of the elm trees rising and falling with all their leaves alight, and the colour thinning and thickening from blue to the green of a hollow wave, like plumes on horses' heads, feathers on ladies, so proudly they rose and fell, so superbly, would have sent him mad. But he would not go mad. He would shut his eyes. He would see no more. End of section 3. Read by Hannah Dormer. London, 20th of March, 2021.